Hi, I'm Thom Ruhe, and this week I'm joined by Ted Zoller, Professor of Entrepreneurship at UNC Chapel Hill. He's visiting us this week to teach the 2013 class of Kauffman Global Scholars. This is Top of Mind. So joining me today on Top of Mind is entrepreneurship professor at UNC Chapel Hill and senior Kauffman fellow Ted Zoller. Ted, thanks for being here today.
Hey, thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
So viewers of Top of Mind may recall that we started the year by saying that there was going to be three big things, big topics for 2013 that we were going to be watching with great interest. One of those was, how crowdfunding is going to be evolving this year, and and the impact that may have to help us democratize entrepreneurship. Another was going to be focusing as an economic development area, focusing on entrepreneurship as opposed to these border wars, where we're using tax abatements and incentives to steal companies across border lines as opposed to organically growing. And the third big idea, and I think, frankly, the biggest of the three, is what's happening in the world of entrepreneurship education, and and even on a broader context, what's happening in academia. So I'm thrilled that we could have one of the most renowned experts, certainly in entrepreneurship education. Your CV is impressive as can be. So thanks again for joining us on it. And I think I'd like to open by getting your, kind of just broad connotation of where you think the state of entrepreneurship education is today.
So, we've learned a lot over the last several months in terms of the work that's being done in democratization. We're seeing now things coming out of the ground that are just really impressive. I'd argue that one of the biggest future trends is really how we learn about entrepreneurship. And it's being driven by two factors. One, people are starting to get educational content off the web. And secondly, social networking is playing a substantial role in how people connect to one another. So what we're seeing is that universities, generally as hierarchical kind of older institutions, don't typically adopt newer technologies. And we're seeing entrepreneurs kind of filling in the hole. So I think right now, the universities, having been the key driver for entrepreneurship education for the last couple decades, are now in the kind of unenviable position of having to catch up to the technology in order to be relevant.
Really? Would this be a fair characterization? I've used it before. That doesn't make it fair. So I'd like to hear from an expert. Would you say that academia is almost in a bubble right now and being kind of pressured by the same economic and entrepreneurial pressures that affected print journalism, for example?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, what we're seeing right now is the leading edge of what will be a transformation of higher education. And some institutions are going to make it, and some institutions will not. Their business model is fundamentally changing, and the way we'll learn will fundamentally change as a consequence. I think what you'll find is that research-intensive universities will remain extraordinarily relevant in creating new knowledge, whereas teaching institutions will have to adapt their strategies to become relevant and remain relevant. The leading edge, I think, is entrepreneurship, frankly, because this is the market that's most ready to make the transformation, and we're seeing it happen now first in the marketplace. So entrepreneurship education is now probably the first leading online, marketplace for teaching.
Would you? So that's an interesting point, and I'm glad you brought that up because I have not thought of this. When you say that you think entrepreneurship education is the leading area where it's going to start, why do you think that is? Is it because there's a tolerance there? There's a kind of an experimental mindset that's willing to do that? I mean, if you had to put some attribution as to what's driving that, what would you guess that is?
Well, it's fascinating, actually. I think there is a paradigmatic difference between the way an entrepreneur would think and the way, a typical business person would think. So I think there would be a propensity for entrepreneurs to drive into that opportunity faster. But I think, frankly, it's more of a function of we're seeing a hacker community start to develop, that there's been a real transformation in the way software is developed, and now this is the age of software deployed on the web and mobile. Entrepreneurs are migrating into that space. They're looking for content. Entrepreneurship is the first market they turn to. Therefore, the content is being converted faster in entrepreneurship than any other market. We're at the tip of the sword in terms of what we're seeing as an economic phenomena. The entrepreneurs are in IT. They're going to deploy the content in entrepreneurship first, and that's what we're starting to see.
That's okay. So that's interesting. And now I start thinking about, and we talked about this earlier, kind of cross linkages into other parts and aspects of the economy. Whether that's, creating these supporting networks. Do you see a role? Do you see kind of the connective tissue coming, then from the traditional academic part of that and how it's morphing in entrepreneurial education, but then translating into, the network effect in the economy?
Yeah. So network is transforming how we do everything, and frankly, the new generation is growing up on the net. And when I say growing up on the net, I'm not just saying on the web. They're growing up interconnected through networks. And we're going to see a different way of thinking, a different way people will access content, access learning opportunities. And this generation, won't come to more hierarchical, more traditional institutions for learning. They're going to expect that learning to be more networked. I see it as an opportunity for higher ed because they'll be able to, frankly, apply learning a little bit better in the classroom. But in terms of the primary content delivery, it's going to happen on the web in the future. The other thing I would mention is networks are going to evolve in a pretty substantial way. Higher ed is in a strong position right now to adopt those technologies and adopt those means to really translate learning into the market. And I'm really excited that entrepreneurship is actually the first content area that this is actually starting to come about, because I think higher ed will learn from the street and therefore will become better at what it does. One thing a university does better than anyone else is to aggregate supply. We have some of the best talent on our campuses anywhere, and because we have an addressable market, we'll be able to deliver content to that market, and it will evolve more quickly as a result. So I think higher ed is going to learn from the street and will adapt and become better as a consequence.
That's fascinating. In speaking in the context of how it's going to distribute within higher ed, another point I had made in a prior episode is, we're certainly working under this theory, and you're aware of this as well, that we're pivoting some of our attention into the community college space. Mm-hmm. And a theory I've been evolving, yet to be proven out, is that I feel that these changes that are happening in the way teaching is going to be happening is a great opportunity for community colleges to find greater relevance.
Absolutely.
In the educational market. And I think for those that can be nimble enough to adopt these these new standards and these new ways of reaching students, can draw parity with four-year schools, or even in some cases provide more relevant experiential-based learning.
So my sense is there's two different settings, right? We have the community colleges that are embedded in the communities, generally know what's happening in that market, understand the core competence of the region. They understand who are the business leaders that are there, the infrastructure that's on the ground, the companies that are there, and therefore would better understand where there are opportunities to create new companies. So by working with new learners in the community college system, I think you would encourage entrepreneurs to come into the economy and transform those economies. So you're going to see kind of a growth in localized economies again, I think, as a consequence. Whereas higher ed is still seen as a destination, still seen as an opportunity for students to go and engage and get their degrees. But we're seeing a lot of pressure due to tuition on return on investment. Are they getting jobs at the outcome? In fact, some elite colleges, I've even seen a ranking recently on the conversion rate of tuition dollars to employment salaries at the end. So there's a lot of attention. Entrepreneurs are seizing on that as the key problem, and they're coming into the education marketplace, transforming that marketplace, and we're going to see some clear changes in the way the basic economics of tuition work among higher education institutions. So I think you're looking at a transformation that's occurring that's primarily going to affect higher education institutions. Institutions that are more research intensive will probably have their own role, whereas teaching institutions are certainly going to be influenced highly. I'm guessing that most of the energy is going to happen at the community college level, where it's more direct, it's more embedded in the community, and much more focused on an entrepreneurial outcome.
From your vantage point, and again, not that you need me to pump up your bona fides, but I mean, you travel the world and you're involved in like really cutting edge experimentation and innovation that's happening in the space. What's the one or two things that you're really watching with excitement right now?
Yeah, so one thing that I'm pretty convinced by is we're putting a lot of energy, and there's been a lot of dialogue. I think, with Brad Feld particularly, and what's happening in Lean Startup, for instance, we're seeing an emphasis on networking from the ground up, what's called democratization, bottom-up networking. But I think there's a 80-20 rule in entrepreneurship. There's a quantity and a quality question. And I think what we're going to see is, as new assets are deployed and specialized, we're going to see really facile serial entrepreneurs kind of start to take a swing at it and start to develop high caliber, high throughput solutions for entrepreneurs. So I think we're going to see this revolution of people getting into entrepreneurship, and then a whole nother second generation of people who are going to look to take those entrepreneurs to the next level. And I'm really excited about that transformation because, we're talking about actually a generation of success. And, frankly, we're lagging because we're still an employment-based economy. The goal of most students that are graduating from our universities today is to be employed. I think the Kauffman Foundation has positioned us to be thinking of entrepreneurship as a career alternative. I think now we're getting an infrastructure that will help support that, and the Kauffman Foundation has been fundamental in driving that. But I think we're going to move from democratization into specialized models to help businesses go to the next level. And I'm quite excited about that revolution.
It does my heart good to hear you say that, because I think in our own small way, one of the experiments we recently put into the marketplace, the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program, I almost would hold that up as an Exhibit A.
Absolutely.
Especially as we're seeing the adoption across multiple spectrums, 4-year, 2-year, but also in economic development organizations, faith-based organizations, correctional facilities. We would never even imagined the pickup we would have in the marketplace like that.
So, Tom, I think what we're going to see unfold is as entrepreneurs evolve, and we're seeing now just the tipping point of a generation of entrepreneurs that have been successful with their first deal. They're now going to be successful serially. We are seeing a generational change. These individuals become the leaders to usher in a whole new range of opportunities in building entrepreneurial networks. And I'm thinking that they're going to deploy, not only content but expertise into the market that'll help people on the rank and file take their ventures to the next level. I think we're going to see transformation in, for instance, equity financing. We're going to see transformation in what we're seeing in education, certainly, and we're certainly going to see a transformation in new distribution models and different ways to bring, solutions to market. So I'm excited about what's going to happen over the next several years as a consequence of the experiments here and in other places in building the bottom, now leading to the top.
Well, I'm very excited that you're joining us on that journey. I feel honored and privileged that we have the benefit of you helping us in that regard.
I'm more privileged than you are.
And let's hope that we're all right, and this will bode well for the economy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have you back on someday soon.
Looking forward to it.